framework, the enabling environment, etc. And I think one of the things that's coming more and more to the surface is, even though, you know, EBA is a new way of speaking about things or ideas that we would have known before. It's a new way to look at or to deal with climate change adaptation and the issues surrounding climate change adaptation. The question is it just political will, you know, or is it that we need to do more with respect to the policy and the strategic framework to make some of these things indeed a reality? And on top of that, the whole notion of joined up government needs to come into play as well, because with some of the, you know, the EBA techniques that we looked at, it's not just about forestry department, but it's about NEPA, spatial planning, it's about your water agencies. It's a range of agencies coming together to decide, you know, what is best, how do we, if for want of a better terminology, rehabilitate this city to achieve some of the benefits of ecosystems. And if, you know, based on what we have read so far, or we have discussed over the last few days, I think it's important for us to recognize that the benefits of EBA may very much outweigh the costs of implementing these instruments, simply because the costs that we are confronted with from climate change is pretty great. And I don't know, I don't think we have anyone here from National Works Agency, but last week when we did NRV, Natural Resource Valuation, if we were to look at the budget of NWA and the specific marker on that budget related to cleanup costs from natural disasters, it would sort of give us a sense of what the avoided costs could be if we had good ecosystems in place, or if, for example, we were implementing across our urban centers some of these EBAs. So I just wanted to start there before we get into actual discussion around EBAs. Is there anything that anyone would like to say, what anyone would like to share before we go into green corridors? And I think too that in all the discussions around EBAs, I think there's a lot of discussions more so around green corridors. I'm not sure if that is so. Is that so? I tend to think that when we talk about EBAs in Jamaica, or even outside of EBAs, there is this discussion around green corridors, also known as linear natural infrastructure. Anybody wants to add anything before I go? And of course, the visualization of that is to the right of your screen. And simply put, I mean, when we think of a corridor, we know what a corridor is in general terms. If we think of a green corridor, what we're looking at are strips of trees, plants, or vegetation. And these can be found at a range of scales and also in a range of different locations across a city. The idea is you want to create a green infrastructure network. And I think that's important in our discussions, because we talk about these different EBA techniques, but we don't necessarily want to have a hodgepodge of different things across the place. How do we plan properly? And what does urban planning and city planning have to entail to ensure that, one, we derive the benefits that we want to from these ecosystems, but that we undertake the planning in this sort of uniform, strategic manner that, you know, still brings a lot of aesthetic back into the city. So, what are your thoughts on green corridors? Anyone? What would be some of the benefits of green corridors? What would they entail? Where do you think they can be placed? So on your slide, it says here, along streets, open train tracks, other transportation and infrastructure corridors, in open and derelict spaces. Do we have opportunities for that here?
Yes, we do, Elizabeth.
Yeah.
Even our city, our drainage structure in the city really has a lot of gullies that we have. For example, the Sandy Gully,
Mm-hmm.
and there are lots of lands along these um drainage infrastructure that we could utilize to make the city greener. So apart from our roadways, I think a good opportunity lies along the several gullies that we have, especially in Kingston and St. Andrew.
What about the idea of, like a lot of people do biking? Oh, Anna, I think that could be you too. What do you think about bike paths?
Yes, and NEPA, I know we have been in our development plans and master plans. Those are recommendations being placed for the relevant authorities when they're doing road infrastructure, even improvement to existing roads, that they incorporate pedestrian areas, bike lanes, inappropriate. We know that some areas will be challenging based on the space availability,
This,
but but
transport.
definitely along the gullies as I mentioned, and at appropriate streetscapes that we're currently working on.
Okay, thanks for that. Um, Anyone else? I saw some other hands.
Um,
Yes, I think
okay.
Go ahead.
I think having green infrastructure could provide relaxation to people, greater health benefits. People can feel more relaxed just going out into the green space and enjoying the natural environment. So I think there are some benefits to that. I mean, even animal life, could be improved. That's my take on it.
Okay, so Duncan is saying, it's a good way of getting greenery into a city without large tracts of land being required. Okay, Denise, I'm gonna come back to you, so give me a second. Someone said shading. Duncan gave the example of, they are wonderful, these green corridors. You have parts, you have green corridors around old train lines, etc. I think there is one in New York, and I'm trying to remember where it is exactly. And it's a good example, it's a good EBA example, and somehow I forgot to put it in this stuff here. But it's actually, I'll remember it, and many of you would have been. It's an upscale mall borders the area, but it's a nice, interesting green corridor. And you actually walk on it, and there are a lot of art stuff on it, etc. I'll soon remember the name. If anybody remembers before me, go ahead. Rose, I see your hand up, and I also saw somebody else's hand up.
Oh, I was thinking of spaces that you could connect. And I know that there are schools, they could create these corridors like from one block to another. I see them in public institutions too. And in communities, we can do like at the community centers, we can
Mhm.
create even a block of trees on one side or depending on the design.
And
But
as
I
I men-
see, so that can be done.
and as I mentioned before, there are some cities that actually
Right.
has, like these green corridors along
Right.
roadways, etc.
For people like to either to walk or ride their bicycle or something.
Yeah, and it's just simply having just a section of your pavement covered in, just has trees around, just lined on the road. There is a comment, I'm coming to you, Adrian. There is a comment from Anna. She said some countries even have bike paths covered with solar panels. Would be great to have a path around and throughout Kingston. It is dangerous as it is on the road. Okay, That's true, because there are a lot of cyclists, I mean, who do their cycling as part of their recreational, their own, and they're just all on the road, and I mean, to me, it seems unsafe. Yes, it's the High Line in New York. I mean, that's an example of a good green corridor. Thanks, Tani. Okay, Dwight is saying we can also use our cemeteries. Yes, some cemeteries around the world really are nice spaces. I mean, they don't seem as gloom and doom as some of the cemeteries we see in the Caribbean. They seem to be nice, serene spaces with lots of trees, benches, etc. Kamar agreed and said our cemeteries are underutilized, which I agree with myself. Adrian, you had a point. Go ahead.
Yeah, it just dawned on me that there between the cemetery beside of St. Andrew Technical, there's almost like a small corridor that could be rehabilitated between that cemetery going across where the prison is, the Horizon prison, to that green space in front of Stats, all the way across across what Greenwich, which is a community that, right, going all the way down to Tinsopen, and that green space, that corridor actually continues down Marcus Garvey Drive across from Seaview into the mangrove swamp. And I'm thinking if there could be potential for actually creating that length of green corridor. And the reason why I brought this up is I know a lot of swarms of honeybees actually passes through that corridor every swarming season. And so I'm like, if there is any hope of rehabilitating ecosystem services in an urban area, that corridor would be the best, in my view, would be the best place to actually start speaking about developing a corridor such as this.
Thanks, Adrian. Thanks for that very pointed comment in terms of the actual location as well. So when we think about green corridors and we think about things like street trees and so on, what we could immediately see is some of these investments actually enhancing the value of the city, just in terms of its look and feel, the aesthetics, etc. But what are some of the ways of the techniques for incorporating green corridors? And it's simple stuff, you know, we've been talking about it. Street tree canopies, you know, where you line streets with large tree canopies, which enhances the image of the city, delivers several benefits that we want. I mean, can you imagine lining a street with, I mean, I don't know if this, with puri trees? What will you see at particular times of the year? You know what I mean? I mean, I don't know if it can work there. I'm just throwing that out.
Ooh.
But it's very beautiful, you know?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, where I live, there are tons of fruit trees, and when they come out, I mean, it's just absolutely beautiful. So you have it, can that be used, for example, for incorporating street tree canopies along, you know, lining streets with some of these. You have green avenues and boulevards, and I mean, next to each, you would see this sort of representation or the visualization of it. And we could think about even business districts and so on. How can we incorporate these green avenues and boulevards? Do we have, you know, there are some spaces around the world where you may have a street that's lined with restaurants. I mean, would you want to have something like that there where you can incorporate like outdoor dining, etc.? I mean, you need to think about those kinds of uses. Again, the benefits of green corridors are not distinctly different from the other benefits. Most of the ecosystem services are the same, but with each of the EbA techniques, Whereas urban farming, there was a focus on food security. When we start to talk about green corridors, we're focusing on things like tourism and recreation. Most of the EBA techniques speak to the impact, the positive impacts on human health. Green corridors also foster biodiversity within your city. And we also have that whole cultural notion. We also have the increase in property values within your city. So green corridors, unlike your urban farming, the focus is not on, say, food security, but also the impact on tourism and recreation and being able to utilize these corridors for recreational purposes. Roseanne, is that an old hand or a new hand?
Old, let me take it. Sorry, old.
Okay, Aisha, you want to elaborate on your comment? Interesting.
All right, I was just thinking that to enhance the whole green street concept, that instead of having hard structures such as concrete walls for different businesses, etc., that we could use vegetation. So you could now have the hedges, and therefore you'd enhance that whole greenscape going along a particular corridor.
Okay, and what you think would be the sort of demand for something like that?
So again, I didn't hear that question.
What would be the sort of demand for something like that?
It depends. If it is that we're pushing this type of concept, I think that it would work. One of the concerns, I think, maybe from a security perspective, but I don't know how to address that. But I'm noticing that, for instance, you're seeing less of the concrete walls. If you look at like an AC Marriott, you notice that it's more of like the kind of wire fencing that they're using, as well as the Toyota depot along Old Hope Road.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm thinking that to kind of go a little bit further with something like that, to now use hedges and encourage the whole greenscape along those things.
Correct. And the truth is, have they been complaining? I mean, if you look at AC Marriott and where BMW is, there are no grills either. And have they been complaining about theft or anybody throwing anything into their windows or anything like that? No, right? So it's possible.
Well, I guess it is possible. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so even as we speak about security, we realize that some of these applications, it's indeed possible and also doable, but we need to create the mechanisms for mainstreaming. We need to bring it out there, even though we know that, you know, we have our architects, we have our engineers, they may be recommended. We also know how people look at costs. You know, yeah, but we could put up that, but the maintenance cost, how much it's going to cost us? And it's going to cost us $10 million a year. We're not going to do it. But if it is part of a policy framework that requires it, then it's a no-brainer, because you're gonna incorporate it anyway. You may reduce something else, but you will incorporate it because it's part of that policy framework. Okay, Camille, you had a point, and I'm going to ask you to elaborate on it, which is also true. And your hand was also up. It was your hand that was up that I didn't see again. Camille?
Oh, I had taken down my hand because Dwight spoke to the points I was making.
Oh, okay.
No, I was just speaking or agreeing with Aisha. This idea that you need these high walls and they have to be a solid boundary it's actually far from the truth. Many studies have been done to show that the more you put up these high solid boundaries, the less secure your property becomes. Once you have this openness, people can see in and people can see out. You're able to prohibit some of these illegal activities because there's nowhere for you to hide. There's no way for you to sneak in. It's immediately obvious that, you know, a group of men has gone onto the compound. And that's part of the issue that we're going to need to break, because the more we build these solid fences, the less likely it is that we have the opportunities for these green corridors.
Thank you, Camille. And Dion, you're here from the NWA, and I was speaking about the NWA, and I think you wanted to make a comment and like the cost of what is the cost? The cost of cleanup following some of these even minor rainfall events. I don't know if that's what you wanted to comment on, Dion.
My name is Denise.
Oh, Denise.
Yeah, I didn't really want to make a comment in per se. You were asking if anyone from NWA is present, so I said yes, someone is here.
Oh, okay. So you're that person?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So do you want to comment? I know you may not necessarily want to, but just to say that I had made the point that following, if we wanted to see the value of, if we wanted to determine to some extent the value of some of the ecosystem services that can be provided to the city, we don't need to look too far, but to an aspect of your budget that you get every year that focuses on cleanup. So whether it's the cleanup from a landslide or multiple landslides every year, or cleaning up gullies that have come down, if we were to have some of these ecosystem services in place, and I'm sure it's not something you want to do because it's a costly, it's costly to just do it, even if the money is coming from the government coffers. Do you think we can use that, for example, as a sort of estimate of the value of the services that we get from ecosystems? And that sort of goes back to our class last week, if you were here, on natural resource valuation and avoided costs.
Yes, I think there's value utilizing the EBAs. However, what we do realize at the NWA, one of our major challenge is garbage disposal, especially where our drains are concerned. That is the biggest issue, garbage disposal. So if it is the case that we can get persons to dispose of their garbage properly, that will also reduce the strain on our budget as it relates to cleanup.
Okay, so garbage disposal in and around cities. And where does garbage come from? Not you, I'm just throwing that out. Where do you think that garbage comes from? In the gully?
Well, garbage comes from persons not utilizing a trash bin, as well. During rainfall events, you have those washing into the gully. One prime example is Paradise Gully. That one runs through, I think, Raytown. Right, there's a lot of plastics that come down and go into the harbor. But at the outfall of the gully, though, they have a trash rack. And again, maintenance is another challenge. The cost to maintain the trash rack. So it's not done on a timely basis.
Where do people think that the garbage comes from, though? I'm curious. Is it coming from the communities that border the gullies? Where is it coming from?
All over.
All over.
All over. And persons too take garbage in their car and throw on the roadside too.
Okay. So we are kind of aware that it's not the people who live in and around the gully throwing the garbage.
Not necessarily.
It's usually not necessarily. Because what you also find is that even in gullies, in places like Kingston 8 and so on, where there is regular garbage collection, the gullies do have stuff in them. And I mean, a good example, an example that I've seen several times is the gardeners throwing stuff in the gullies. So it's not short of garbage bags, it's not short of talking, they just throw stuff in the gully. This is coming from Kingston 8, it's just a lot. They'll just throw stuff in the gully, all the tree cuttings, everything, just in the gully. And a lot of times it's what we do on this side that causes the people down below to be flooded out. So just throwing that out. All right, so we had our green corridors and we had some discussion around that. Another one that we've been talking a lot about and not putting a name to it is the concept of building solutions. And we've been talking a lot about this one in terms of, you know, adding green surfaces to building roofs, construction of green roofs, these walls on the side of the buildings. So this is the concept of building solutions. You know, I think in the first class, we had spoken about the whole idea of creating opportunities within buildings to capture, store, and reuse stormwater, right? So that's another aspect of building solutions. Again, like any of the other concepts, they contribute to things like reducing flooding, they improve property values, they improve the marketability of buildings, you know, they add this, you know, a better ambiance. It's a new thing now. Somebody had mentioned, I think in a previous class, that social media has brought the concept of building solutions to life because everybody is taking a photo behind a green wall. In the past, persons may not have necessarily liked green walls because of the concept of, you know, the lizards living in the wall, I guess, on the wall, etc. So these are benefits of building solutions that we were talking about in terms of the green roofs, the green walls, some amount of farming, urban farming on roofs, the ability to provide shade, etc. And again, the question is, if we're to push this notion of building solutions, how do our laws related to buildings, our laws, our policies, our guidelines, how can we ensure that they incorporate building solutions? So the idea of, yes, sensitization is great, but sensitization wouldn't give us the extent of the EbA services that we would, the EbA techniques to be incorporated that we need. So how then do we push to get these simple things? Because some of them, of course, would require additional work. I mean, you can't just go put something on a roof. I mean, there were examples in the classes before which spoke about maybe the roof sinking or the roof not being able to accommodate that. But in new construction, how do we bring these things on the table?
All right, my take on it first, before we even go into the technical aspect or the geotechnical aspect, would be reform reform the urban planning laws or zoning laws and facilitate the technical modifications or geotechnical modifications that will be needed to make some of these building solutions even possible.
Okay, so we're looking at the legal framework. We need to look at the policy framework. And the truth is, we may not need to go back and say, well, each building that is here today, we need to incorporate these things and you need to renovate. Yes, we can have guidelines for that, but it could mean that in every construction going forward, this is how these would be the new principles, or in any renovation going forward, these would be the principles or the guidelines that you ought to adopt. Tani, your hand is up.
Yes, I'm agreeing with that, but I was also thinking that it's good to just do it by example, especially on the government side. So for example, I was in Belize and they had, I'm trying to remember the exact building it was, but one of the newest government buildings is a completely green building, lovely trees around it. It's one of those things that you have to drive by and you want to go inside to see what it's all about. It's very open in terms of glass. You look at it and you would be inspired. So I can see if it is that the government decides to, if they're doing any of their newer buildings, if they set the mandate and they do a building looking like something like this, I think it will generate for the private sector to say, okay, that's something cool. Maybe I will lean that way, because if we are setting an example, I think sometimes we're waiting for the private sector or for other persons to do something for us while we're spending millions, billions of dollars putting out tenders for buildings and stuff, where we can actually just start and showcase what it is that we need. So I think we have to actually start the mandate. And I think once we do that, lots of other people will follow. I mean, yes, we can do it by policy and stuff, but some of those things take forever, as we know.
And
So-
no, a policy should not take any time. When a government
Right.
is interested in implementing a policy,
Yes.
it can be passed within 4 months.
Well, no, we saw
Yeah.
one recently that happened within days, right? So I guess it is possible.
No, it's possible. The National
Yeah.
Energy Policy, which I was part of, happened in 4 months. So
Well,
changes to the energy sector, but it has to also do with at the agency level that's
There
guiding
you
the
go.
process,
Right.
the ministry level, because you do have policies, and let's be frank, the National Ocean and Coastal Zone Policy, has that been passed yet?
There are many of them that have been
And that one, I can talk about
promulgated.
that one in particular.
Okay.
That one was happening from I was 24.
Wow. Yeah.
Okay, so that is 20 odd years ago that that particular policy was being put in place. People have retired who was working on that policy, like Ms. Barnaby, and she's now retired, like many of you probably don't know Ms. Barnaby, about 8 years now. I mean,
Oh,
so
Lord.
if we want, the thing is, how do you have government lead by example too? They have to be guided by policy. We have new buildings. We have the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. It don't look like this out over here that we were
No.
seeing on the screen, which kind of looks inviting, you know, it looks really nice.
Yeah.
We're not really seeing it. I mean, it's just like a visualization. But there are so many new buildings going up. That's one. There are new buildings, government buildings, private sector. And these are things that it's almost as though they're almost in some cases no cost. They're not significant layout costs for government, for example. So how do we get these going? How do we get our architects to sign on? I mean, I'm sure they understand what to do. They have the expertise. How do we get these applications applied? You know, we have smaller new buildings going up. We see on Lady Musgrave Road, for example, I think I saw a building going up over there, but I can't remember if it's pure concrete or glass. You know, I mean, there are so many opportunities, and we miss all of these opportunities, you know, and we've been missing them for several years, you know. There are some comments in the chat. Okay, Adrian, because her sister may have, okay, we are talking, okay, yes, okay, so not major comments there. So we see the benefits. The question is, how do we do it? And Tanya spoke this morning about some of the ways in which, yes, we understand as a government that ecosystems are important. Yes, they're mentioned in Vision 2030. Yes, we have a climate change policy. We have other smaller policies, but how do we utilize EBAs as a climate change adaptation strategy? How do we get some of these EBAs in practice? What would be the enabling environment to do that? That being said, EBA, and I am not sure, I don't recall Tanya bringing it up, recognizing the importance of the environment is one thing, but do we see this in any policy space, the actual notion of EBAs? Do we see it in climate change? Do we see it in climate change policy? Is it in our energy policy? Is it in, you know, where exactly is it located at this point? Are our spatial plans reflecting some of these EBAs? Where is it? Can anyone sort of, you know, our land use planning, local authorities, how are we reflecting any of these EBAs. I remember, I think Adrian Henriques asked a question about how do we know if we have an urban forest? Are we looking at any of these kinds of, requirements? What do we need? What do we have? How has our city changed? How have our urban areas changed? How are our peri-urban areas changing? Why are they supporting the cities less? What do we need to do? What kind of analysis do we need to put in place? So whilst, as I always say, whilst encouraging is great and I could like it and I could see it and I could want it, the importance of mainstreaming is very critical. I don't know if anyone was part of the development. I mean, we have NAPs in place in Jamaica. Oh yes, we do have someone from Climate Change Division. Are you with us? I think it's Shamoy. Shamoy? Is she back on? I'm not sure. Is Shamoy on, or is anyone from Climate Change Division on to just speak to what the climate change policy is saying? I think it was recently revised. Anyone? Nobody? Anybody from the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation?
I am from there, remember, Rose?
I was thinking anybody.
Right.
But
I cannot say at this point. I've seen the concept, just thinking about it. Now that I'm on this training, I'll have to give more thought. But I know that usually the landscape planning usually take this into consideration. Don't know where it will fall here.
So what?
I don't know. In other countries, it is recognized in the formal and both the informal planning instruments. But here, I don't know where it will fall based on how our legislation, how it is with the environment and planning and all of that. So, but landscape planning usually takes it into consideration in other countries. And I know they kind of link it with the adaptation, ecosystem-based adaptation in cities, where they use formal and informal planning instruments to deal with it. So, so no, since I'm on this training, I'll have to do further research and see how best we can adopt that concept.